I have the great privilege of talking today with Luis Mojica. Luis, thank you so much for coming on the Middleweight Podcast.
I love being here. Thank you.
So, Luis, you are a somatic practitioner, educator, nutrition coach, holistic lifestyle coach. Um, and I'm wondering, just to start out this conversation, for people who are new to somatics and somatic experiencing, if you could give us a sense of what that is and how that relates to trauma, which many of us carry in our life.
Absolutely. So it is a trauma modality, a therapeutic modality that goes through the lens of neurobiology, which just simply means how does my nervous system respond to the experiences I am in? My history, my present, my thoughts, my relationships. What's my body doing with that? And so a lot of modalities with trauma happen to do with thinking. They're about like what happened and identifying the cause of maybe some behaviors or syndromes. Whereas somatic experiencing is all about where do I carry what happened? How does this show up in my posture? How does this show up in my, for me, eating habits because I work with nutrition as well? How does this show up in my relationship patterns, but from the body? Like, what's the felt sense of them? And the whole purpose of that is when you can identify the felt sense, you're no longer really identified with the event, let's say. You're just noticing where it lives inside of you so you can coach it and be with it and facilitate its movement.
Hmm. That's fascinating. So, the trauma that we experience, the experiences that we have, they're kind of stored in our nervous system. And if I sort of understand correctly, by being able to actually get in contact with those sensations, that allows them somehow to be able to resolve themselves or to move through us in a different way.
Yeah, so what happens here is this is some of the misunderstanding is that the event itself is in the body, and in a way it is, but the way it's in the body is in the posture. So let's say there was some relational trauma between me and my father, and in the moment of the traumatic event, my shoulder is pulled up. Now, in that pulling up and constriction, my fists constricting, my shoulders lifting, if that never remediated, if my body said, okay, he's gone now, I can take a breath, my shoulders can go down, then I would have, quote, moved through the trauma had that release occurred. But if I'm still in the constricted place, I'm still tense and what we would call a freeze response, then the posture hasn't left. So the body still thinks it's happening or is about to happen. So it lives in preparation. So it's really about noticing, did I recover from the event? Meaning, did my body go back to its more balanced stature and biochemistry? Like, is there less adrenaline in my veins? Are my blood vessels less constricted? Are my muscles more relaxed? How's my breathing? Have those biochemical and biological markers reduced and gone back to their regulated state? Or are they still really heightened as if it's happening right now? So that's how we tend to look at it, more like the trauma's in the body, not in the event.
Hmm. And let's say that some of us, or maybe most of us, have gone through these situations where we then end up carrying that trauma in the body, and our body is in that holding posture and it hasn't fully resolved itself. Um, what could that potentially mean for us in our life? Like, in other words, how does that show up for us psychologically, emotionally, physically in our lives?
So much. So the easy way I'll start with is when you're in that, what I call the biochemistry of trauma, because the biochemistry of trauma doesn't mean it's happening right now. Like when you have stress and when you have trauma, it's the same thing biochemically. It's an adrenal response. And adrenaline makes the body constrict and it raises your blood pressure. It gets you ready to act. It's the whole purpose of it. So when you're living in it, like you're saying, you're living in an adrenalized state. And that shows up in so many ways. The chronic constriction cuts off blood flow to your joints, so your muscles can atrophy and you can have inflammation just from holding constriction in the joint for years or decades. So syndromes like inflammation, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, major way that this manifests itself, especially in the thyroid for people whose voices are shut down. They're literally constricting around their thyroid glands. Your endocrine system gets thrown off because when you're just making excess adrenaline, your other hormones can't be processed as balanced as they'd like to be. So that means your digestion, your sleep, so your ability to repair. I mean, it goes really deep. And then your eating habits, any drug addictions, relationship addictions, habits of watching things, scrolling with things to try to get out of that pain that you're feeling. These are all the ways it manifests when you're living in that traumatized state.
Hmm. Now, I remember coming across this work while I was in graduate school, and I read Peter Levine's book. And at the time, I was experiencing this is probably one of the most difficult times of my life. I was
Mm,
experiencing panic attacks every single day, multiple times a day, and desperate for anything that would help. And
mhm.
so, in addition to some other practices like self compassion, I found somatic experiencing. I found a somatic experiencing practitioner, and that was really helpful for me to get back in touch with my body. And one of the practices, that I draw out and use with people a lot is kind of like an orientation exercise, getting them back and connected to the environment. But I'm wondering if you would be open to it, if you would be willing to kind of guide us through a practice that
Mhm.
you find really helpful, just to help people to get more present, to get back in touch with their bodies. And so, if anyone is watching or listening and maybe they want to follow along, if you'd be open to it, Luis, I would absolutely love it.
Absolutely. I
Cool.
love it. So one of my favorite practices is was something I developed called feeling the now. And it's an orienting practice. So everyone following, I'll walk you through it and then people can just kind of follow us. You just start by noticing what you're touching. And you don't have to feel a certain way. You just notice, can I feel what I'm touching? So your hands, your arms on the office chair, right? The armrest, your back, your seat and your legs and your feet, and just kind of scanning and noticing, can I feel what's holding me? And then we're checking in with the chest and the belly, and we're noticing, are these areas constricted? Are they soft? Are they numb? And again, not to change it, just to kind of notice, where is my body right now? And then we use our eyes, we start looking around the room, and we literally look for something pleasant. And we see, okay, if I'm looking at this something pleasant, can I feel it in my body? Can I feel the thing I'm looking at? And you pause and you notice that. And if so, where do you feel it? And wherever you feel it, if you're able to, you put a hand there just to anchor into that place. Yeah. And you're taking a moment just to notice how much my body is feeling the room I'm in and how much my body is feeling something that has already happened or is coming up. So if I'm stressed about something coming up, where do I feel that stress in my body? Different from where I feel the places I'm actually looking at or the places I'm in right now. Same thing with historical stress. If I just came off of a really stressful call or something happened last week or last year, where am I still clenching when I think of that? And how does that compare to the place that settles into the chair? So you're scanning for multiple things, but really noticing, what does it feel like to be here now? Maybe you tell me what you're noticing.
Yeah, so I notice like sensation, almost like energy kind of moving or maybe dropping a little bit kind of in the throat area.
Mhm.
I found this green sweatshirt in my closet that I'm looking at that gave me this sense of, pleasant sensation. And then also just, yeah, kind of like a softening kind of in my chest, all the way through kind of through my torso. And it was really helpful. I could really feel kind of the difference when you said noticing if I'm paying attention to or leaning into something that happened earlier or something that's about to happen, which for me was like, okay, next question for Luis. I was like already leaning into that and then being able to come back to like what I'm actually experiencing now in the moment and really connect to that. And there's such a difference between those things.
That's awesome. Part of what I love about this practice is it's easy, it's quick, it's simple, and it helps people just feel where they are. And it's also a diagnostic because people that truly have PTSD or are numbed out, from being in freeze response or being really overwhelmed, they can't even perceive where they are. So their bodies are clenching from the past or in anticipation of the future, but they can't feel their present state. So no amount of support remediates anything because they simply can't even feel it. So just assessing how much of me can feel where I am gives you a sense of what's your body able to receive right now too.
It's really amazing how little actually we're truly in contact with what's actually happening. And I was listening to one of your podcast episodes before we came online here in this conversation. And one of the things that you were guiding people through was to just notice, well, of course, connect to the environment, but also like kind of notice like what's safe about the environment now.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
just reminds me of like how much our brain is in a state of thinking about what's not going to be safe in the next moment or anticipating, even in areas where we might be in a unsafe, kind of an unsafe place, like a war zone or something like that. And of course, not to um, diminish like what is happening there, but at the same time, is there safety right now that people can connect to help them regulate?
That's my favorite thing. I've had the privilege because of having like a public online presence of working with people from all around the world. So I've been able to work with people who are in active war zones, who literally in between the sound of bombs dropping can find safety. And they are my greatest teachers because they're able to perceive in this moment, nothing has happened to me. And the whole purpose of that is not to deny that there's a bomb about to be dropped in 20 minutes or a siren's going to go off, but it's for them to feel the settling, because in the settling is what we call capacity being created. Space opens up because you're not tense. And when space opens up, you have more resourcing to then deal with the next bomb that drops. So some people can see this as a practice of bypassing pain, like spiritually bypassing or intellectually bypassing, but it's actually a way of bringing more resource to the inevitable or the actual experience of pain or stress or trauma you're going through. So it helps create more resilience, actually.
Hmm. Why does our brain do that? This might be like a very profound question, but like, why, from your view, from your experience and understanding, like, why is our brain leaning so much into the future and anticipating what's going to happen? And especially if we've gone through trauma, why is it so like kind of obsessed or attached to like what is not happening right now?
Well, I'm going to underline when you said, especially if we've gone through trauma, because again, if we remember the biology of trauma, it's essentially a constricted one. When you're adrenalized, you're constricted. So when you develop in a constricted physiology, it doesn't feel good to open because your body overcouples constriction with protection and survival. So your body thinks it must stay protected, in this case, constricted all the time, to be in preparation for the inevitable hell that will occur. So the anticipated threat, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, it's in the anticipation that all the stress takes place. When actual horrible things happen, we can't even think. Our bodies take over and we tend to move through them. But the waiting for them builds because there's an orienting to it happening. But there's also a strategy of if I'm imagining something horrible, it tenses me up. So it serves that physiology of the body's belief to think I must stay constricted to be safe.
Mm.
Whereas if I start softening, if I'm looking around thinking life's really good right now, and I start softening, the body experiences that softening as I'm losing my protection. So it all comes down to actually needing to titrate in the sensation of goodness and building capacity for goodness, which we don't really focus on. We think once we have goodness, everything's going to be okay. But we don't even know how to handle goodness, somatically speaking, when we come from that biochemistry that we're constricted all the time.
Oh, that is so amazing. So I think, what I'm hearing you say is that like we are almost the way that I think about it is kind of addicted to not feeling good,
That's
to
right.
bracing ourselves because that gives us this feeling of being safe so that I can deal with whatever in anticipation might come up. And it's really scary to let that go and to let our guard down. So as a practitioner, you're saying that you help people to do that, but doing it in kind of a titrated way.
Mhm.
Is do you recommend? Do you help people do that in small doses? Like how does that process work?
The way it looks like in a session is it looks like tracking the person's wavelengths. So when you're trained somatically, you're trained to track activation and regulation. So you're watching for signs of the person's getting activated and stress is building. And then you're watching for signs of, oh, now it's dissipating, they're coming down. So when it comes to goodness, it's similar. When someone's going into a good space, they breathe a little deeper. You start seeing their shoulders relax. Maybe they start moving things. If they were really stiff, they start like unthawing, unfreezing rather, thawing out of the
Yes.
freeze. And then you're watching them do that, but you're also waiting for the moment of when do they hit their edge? How much goodness and openness can they tolerate? And I tend to find people are like 30 seconds to a couple minutes tends to be where it lies, which is fascinating when you think about it. Because you think when you hear people talk about releasing stress, it sounds like, oh, it released. I don't have stress anymore. It doesn't work that way. It releases momentarily, and then a thought comes in like, oh, I have that bill to pay later. And instant clenching or
Mhm.
even guilt, like, who am I to be happy when someone else is suffering? Or I'll never connect to people again because we bond over our pain. Like all these other things come in, and then you clench up. So in a session, it's like I watch to see what's their window of tolerance for feeling open, and then we kind of follow the body, like the body wants to constrict and collapse. Instead of shaming it or trying to make it stay open to have some kind of statement of your healing, just let it constrict again. Feel how it constricts in the parts that like constricting, and then wait for the parts that want to open again. And it's like this blossoming and contracting of flowers, but the body is leading you. You're not telling it what to do.
Hmm. I can relate so much to all of that, and especially the piece about feeling guilty. Like, who am
Yes.
I?
Yeah.
Who the hell am I to feel good and to just allow myself to like relax for a little bit? I have way too many things to
That's
worry
right.
about.
That's right. That's right. It
Yeah.
is the most I've learned the most controversial thing in the world is being happy because people are more angry at you when you have nothing to be upset about than if you have a lot to be upset about. People, oh, me too, me too. But when you're happy, you're not as relatable. So I find it fascinating.
Oh, I love that so much. So one of the things also that I'm kind of like picking up on and hearing as you're talking about how you guide people through this process is paying really non-judgmental attention to what's happening in the body. So you said like in guiding us through the practice, like, okay, if you're whatever, if you're tense, just let it be there. Or if your body wants to move, let it move. And I want to take this thread and let's see if we can make this maneuver, but to thread this kind of to our external relations with interpersonally with other human beings. So this element of like relating non-judgmentally to what's happening internally, can you talk about how that shows up in our relationships, kind of in our attachment, and how that can or cannot make people safe depending on how we're showing up to them?
Absolutely. So there's two parts there. First part is let's use the word strategy. So when we're thinking of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, these four Fs, these trauma responses that come when there's an overwhelming or traumatic event, these are body strategies. So when I teach it through a biological lens, it's the same thing as sneezing. It's like something has stimulated the body to have a reflexive automatic response that has nothing to do with you and is out of your control. So it's not personal. It's not who you are. It's not even your choice. It's happening through your body. So it's not you. So the first stage is not just hearing that, but experiencing when you get triggered. Did you choose to get triggered? Did you sit back and say, I'm going to decide if I want to get really hot and bothered about this, or I'm going to be really chill? You don't decide that. It happens to your body and through your body. And then you get this kind of small window of opportunity to respond to it before it takes over and you yell at somebody or you reflexively binge eat or you go run and slam the door, right? So we have to understand first that this is a physiology that happens through the body that isn't who we are. It's a strategy based on overwhelm. When couples learn that, or when friends or family members or even groups like businesses learn this about the people they're with, they start to notice, oh, that behavior is a sign that person's at capacity. They have way too much stress in their body, and this is how their body has learned over the years to remediate it, essentially. It doesn't mean you just put up with bad behavior, but you put it into a new context where it's not about you and it's not who they are, but it's a signal of where they're at in their bodies. When you have two people doing that simultaneously, it's magic because no one's taking it personally. They're seeing it just like you would see a sneeze or a yawn or a cough. oh, that person's body's doing that thing they do when they're stressed. And then they learn how to not take the other person's strategy personally or make
Mhm.
it about themselves or even take it on. They let them move through it. Eventually, their body will calm down. And once they're in a more regulated place, then they have their conscious mind back. They can have a conversation and repair whatever came up.
Hmm. Interesting. So you're relating to someone interpersonally, they get triggered or there's some sort of, yeah, dysregulation happening. As you know, the person perceiving that, understanding that it's not necessarily personal. This person has gone beyond their capacity to regulate. It's something physiologically happened. And in being able to kind of hol- both not take it personally and kind of hold that space for someone else, that can maybe prevent some sort of escalation from happening or some other unhealthy dynamic from occurring.
Huge. Because when someone's in their strategy, let's say their strategy is to roll their eyes at you, right? And that's what their bodies do when they're overwhelmed. They don't even know they're doing it half the time. It's just like the body's doing it. And that says to you, they disrespect me. And then immediately you say to them, why are you disrespecting me? And they're like, what are you talking about? You just rolled your eyes. You must hate me. We are attaching all this meaning onto something that has nothing to do with us.
Hmm.
When someone rolls their eyes at me, that's telling me how stressed their body is. It has nothing to do with me. And so, kind of separating that gives me this compassion because I see the signal, oh, this person's overwhelmed. And I back off and I wait for the moment where I see them rest. And then we talk about what happened. What did I do that, caused your eyes to roll? Rather than you must hate me because you rolled your eyes at me. There's no story, there's just a curiosity.
Hmm. Yeah. Sort of makes me think of, I mean, also in being able to regulate ourselves to keep in mind that the other person isn't necessarily causing our own dysregulation. It's our interpretation of it. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
kind of being responsible for our own selves. And that can feel like a burden, maybe, but also very empowering at the same time. Um,
So empowering. I don't, it's so hard for me sometimes to understand how it doesn't seem empowering because it doesn't. I've had people,
yeah,
be really upset with me with that and we work through it
sure.
together. But this idea that, oh, my stress is caused by the meaning I'm putting on it, incredibly empowering. It's like I have some control over whether or not I get stressed based on the meaning that's being made. Now, where I try to unshame that is you're not consciously making the meaning. Your meaning is also your strategy. You're trying to make sense of this thing in front of you, this person, this behavior that doesn't make sense, right? But when you drop that and you notice, well, without meaning, let me just see and feel what I'm seeing, there's a connection that arises. Whereas with meaning, we tend to disconnect because now I kind of other you from me with the story I tell about you, and it hurts me too. And it's where I go actually when I did this political conference last year with our friend Monica. And she does this incredible work with this organization called Braver Angels. And at the organization, they had 700 people, half Republican, half Democrat. And I did this session with, I think, 50 of them, half and half, so 25, 25. And the session was called I'm Not Responsible for Your Triggers. And it was it was so triggering, just the title. And what it came down to, what we understood by it was I'm 100% responsible for my actions. Like if I roll my eyes at you, I'm responsible for that. Even if it's reflexive, it still is in my body, it's within me to respond to. But what that feels like for you and the story you tell about it has zero to do with me. That's where my responsibility ends.
Whoa. Okay. I want to dive into this more because I think this is so useful. So, um, we're not responsible for other people's reactions and as far as how they're reacting to, let's say I'm having a conversation and I'm expressing my political views on something. Um, I can understand that how that other person reacts actually is not my responsibility. How can we, Luis, like at the same time, I guess, try to have those conversations in a way that are like respectful and cordial? So, like taking responsibility for what happens, but also
Mhm.
releasing the responsibility, I guess, of the other person at the same time. Can you talk about that a bit?
Again, it's so dicey, right? So what's important here, there's a couple pieces. The one thing is if I'm accountable and responsible for my actions, I'm clearly in direct relationship to what I have control over. If I assume to be responsible or accountable for how you feel, I'm literally disempowering you. Like, I find it quite disrespectful, actually, to assume that I have power over how you feel. Like, how overpowering is that and actually oppressive is that? I don't have power over how you feel. I have power over what I do. I have power over being curious about why do you feel the way you feel after I said that. That's where my compassion comes in, to actually be open to hearing how you experienced me and what I said or what I did, and being curious to say, maybe they're right. Is there something I could have done better? Did I actually do something outside of my integrity? That's the accountability for my action. What we tend to see, and this is partly labeled under the fawning response, which is a people-pleasing reflex. What we tend to see is immediate apologizing for what someone does without even questioning how we feel about it, to soothe the other person. So
Mm,
it's like almost a coddling of the other to extinguish their emotional experience just by reflexive apologizing. And to me, that's not connection, that's not repair, that's not even intimacy. It's an avoidant technique to not go into a really intimate place, which is, I pissed you off. Let's talk about it. Like, that's intimate
mm,
versus, I'm sorry, I'm horrible, I've caused your pain. It too quickly dances away from a much more delicate dance of what I did, how you feel, can we stay in our own lanes and connect around that?
mm,
And I was doing this through a political lens with this group because, as we know, the left and right trigger the hell out of each other. And so there's such a divide in our country around that. And one way to bridge that divide is to learn how to not be responsible for how someone feels, but to be 100% responsible for what you do so you can actually connect with each other. Whereas if I'm responsible for how you feel about everything I'm saying to you right now, I'm probably going to change my words. I'm going to skirt around things. I'm going to self censor in a way that doesn't even let you get to know me. So we never connect or build capacity for that potential conflict.
mm. That's really helpful. And there's a thin line there between like I'm 100% responsible for what I do and being, like you said, open to that feedback about, okay, maybe this is how I can show up differently. Like you can take 100% responsibility, but at the same time, knowing that you can't be responsible for someone else's
That's right.
experience, only they can. That's a thin line, but a really important distinction there. I really
Really
appreciate that.
important. And as thin as that line is, it's massive in terms of empowering and respecting the other. I mean, to tell you a story that I'm in charge of how you feel, that's dangerous. I mean,
Mm,
to me, that's actually more abusive than being like, I'm not responsible for how you feel, but I did do something that sucked and I'm going to sit with it. Like, that's much more honoring you than saying, I can actually control your feelings based on what I do or don't do.
mm. I love this framework. And I mean, within this, it sounds like there's a way to show up like really authentically and be extremely honest about how we're feeling and disagree. And in a
Mm,
way, even that disagreement somehow can create more of a container of safety than maybe the kind of people pleasingness of
mm.
it.
Oh, yes. I love, I talk about this a lot because in the trauma field, all we hear is safe space, safe space, safe space. I'm not a fan of safe spaces in terms of I don't promise them or guarantee them because, again, I have no control over how you feel. I know what my intentions are. But I say that because when I go into a room where everyone's censoring themselves because they don't want to trigger each other or have any conflict, that does not feel safe to me. That feels tense and things are being unsaid and things are sneaky. And I do not feel settled in that environment. But when I know people are really open to disagreement and they're open to conflict and they're really curious and they're willing to go there with each other, that to me feels so safe and liberating.
Mhm. I love this. I mean, because you are essentially kind of flipping upside down the paradigm that I think many people fall into and maybe feel like is the right way to go about things, but having an understanding of actually kind of how these interpersonal dynamics work, what creates safety, the neurobiology of it,
Mhm.
actually can help us understand. And it's still very compassionate. We're not saying that we want to harm anyone. We're saying
Nope.
actually there might be another way to create even more safety, deeper safety there, and at the same time allow a diversity of opinions and beliefs and viewpoints to come up, and that's it's almost there's a duality to it that actually makes it seem very cool and right.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think that all the fertility and friction and intimacy, it lives in that kind of duality rubbing against each other. And one thing I think from a lot of, especially generations that developed online, where their teenage years are very much online, they're in the echo chamber of the algorithm, where there isn't enough disagreeing with how they feel, and there isn't enough to hold them in an embodied way around disagreeing. I mean, to learn how to embody a disagreement is very big, amazing, important work. If I say something is a safe space, it's an intellectual assertion. Are we talking about the body or are we talking about the intention? The two different things exist there. Same with the disagreement. I might not like what you said, but can I feel open in my heart to you as I don't like what you said?
Hmm.
That's an embodied disagreement rather than because I don't like what you said, I don't like you and I'm going to harm you. That's two different things.
Hmm.
And I find that that's the issue with conflict avoidance is we think having conflict means some kind of harm's going to arise when conflict can be a beautiful thing.
Hmm. And if we're not learning and practicing that, as you say, maybe especially the younger generation, but probably also older generations as well,
Yeah.
I would think that, our bandwidth for what we're able to tolerate as far as being able to hold the emotions of kind of maybe the discomfort that comes up in disagreement, which I mean, it can
Hmm.
also be a sense of safety, but that bandwidth goes down. And as that bandwidth goes down, there's more of a need to isolate ourselves from one another and having those conversations because they're really uncomfortable. And that can turn into a kind of a positive feedback cycle and of more and more separation and division, I think.
I'm glad you said that because I think it does affect anyone, regardless of the generation, because it's a practice. So if you're in any experience where you're just around people who agree with you, or you're quite disembodied, you can't practice what it is you just said. Because the main thing we're practicing is telling the difference between actual threat and discomfort. But when you go back to that biochemistry of stress and trauma, they're identical. When I'm uncomfortable because you said something controversial and I feel that rush, that's an adrenalized experience. That's where the rush comes from. That's the same wave of adrenaline that happens if a bear is chasing me in the woods. So it's hard biochemically to distinguish stress and danger from just I'm overwhelmed or uncomfortable or triggered by what this person said. So when people can learn, oh, I can be uncomfortable, I can be triggered, I can be disliked even, and that doesn't mean I'm in danger. I can be safe. That's like a new lens of freedom and capacity for relating.
Yeah, you had said in one of your podcast episodes that people are looking for their safety in other people. So I need you to affirm my belief and to agree with me in order to feel safe.
Hmm.
But that is very different than what you're talking about here, as far as finding a sense of safety in being simultaneously finding safety in the sense of discomfort and disagreement.
Mm, absolutely. Because the safety we're talking about, again, to somaticize it, it's the places in me that are unaffected, the places in me that feel in the chair right now. And the breath that enters my lungs, that's my safety. It lives in me. So when I need you, like you said, to say a certain thing or not say a certain thing so I can feel safe, that's not safety, that's codependence. My state depends on your state to feel settled. That is hell. I lived like that for a very long time. So I empathize with people who live that way and I intimately know what it feels like. And now I'm on the other side of that and it feels amazing to know someone can dislike me even. And here I am in my chair. So I'm not looking to the world to reflect me back to me. I'm grounded in me, and from there I connect. And it's not an isolationist view, by the way. It's not like we should never have love or we don't need it. We definitely need others in community and connection. And do I bring my safety to my relationships and it builds? Or do I seek it from the other people? It's a very different posture.
It's so beautiful. I can be happy regardless of what you think or feel or how you behave towards me. And I can still love you regardless. And there's nothing that you can do about that.
Nothing. You can't
Yeah.
make me stop loving you.
Yeah.
You can't make me stop being happy. That's right.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. So I'm gonna try to thread a needle here, but you had in one of your podcast episodes, were talking about kind of all of this, but in the context of a very recent and very top of mind issue for all of us, which is the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. And you had a guest on your show, April Harder, and you guys had such an interesting conversation. And so I wanted to see if we could bring this through a little bit, if
Yeah.
possible. Um, but you and her were talking about kind of how it's almost there's a lot of pressure sometimes where people get kind of co-opted into taking a certain stand, or I think the way that you had referred to it was shaming people into accountability, shaming
Yeah.
people into being accountable. So, in other words, like if you don't, do this hashtag or pick a side or something like that, or if you're silent, then you should feel ashamed, and you need to come on a certain side.
Hmm.
And that made my nervous system relax because like this is something that I've been thinking about and writing about and talking about a little bit too, as far as like, where the place that we start from, like when we're asking people to be compassionate, but we're not being compassionate towards
Hmm.
them. And so I don't even know if I have a question here, but can you kind of maybe talk a little bit about how you've seen this play out in our current moment as far as these sort of interpersonal dynamics and how you view those things?
Yeah, I mean, there's that question I ask myself of in my pursuit to end oppression, am I being oppressive? And that's what I'm always living by is am I adding to the very thing I'm trying to extinguish or transform, or am I meeting it from a different place, from a duality, to alchemize it? And so in these moments when you're asked to pick a side, and I'm so not a side picker, like my history and how I was born, the family I come from, I can't pick a side. That's the beauty of growing up the way I did. So there's too much non-duality in my personal history to
Yeah, and
think that way.
same here. I come from divorced parents, and so and literally
Yeah,
you can, as you can see, my podcast is called The Middle Way. So I mean that's it's a
there you
problem
go.
for me too. But yes, please.
But and I love that, and that scares somebody because when you see someone shaming someone into accountability, first of all, let's go back to what I said about couples and relationships. That's their strategy. That's not who they are. I don't see that person as bad or malicious. I don't even see them as narcissistic. Like I wouldn't use those identities with them. They're scared. And their strategy for trying to find safety, which is everyone's strategy is I'm trying to find safety, is to get people to agree with them. Because they think if enough people agree with them or do the thing they want to do, something's going to change. In this case, the war will end or a ceasefire will occur. And so people will settle into their bodies and they're looking for that settling outside of themselves. So this is what we get when we're trying to find safety outside of us. We're getting shaming into accountability because I need people to not disagree with me on this because it's very dangerous if you do. Now, whether it's true or not, I'm not going to decide if it's to who am I to decide if it's true and if they're right or not. It's about to me the relational posture, and this is where the somatics comes in. What does it feel like in my body when I demand something of you? What's the quality? Is that like an open quality? Is it a subtle quality? Or is it a really constricted, painful quality? And to be demanded of and to reflexively perform to meet the demand of the mob asking you to do so, what does that feel like in your bones? Does that feel like love? Does that feel like connection? To me, it feels like a tether and it feels really oppressive and burdening. So this is where that fawn response comes in, the people-pleasing mechanism, especially for people who are online or have any kind of large audience. They feel this need to appease their audience so they can feel safe because they're looking for safety outside of themselves.
Hmm.
But when people come to me with these demands, even with intense, I mean, like vitriolic comments to shame me into believing something or rescinding something I said or making me say something I didn't say, I'm so sturdy in my sense of self and my true love for them. I know what it's like to be that desperate and scared about something that I'm not in that reflexive place where I'm going to
Hmm.
acquiesce.
Hmm.
So there's a capacity for their conflict to continue
Hmm.
rather than I'm going to hashtag or say the thing they want me to say so they settle. I don't need them to settle. They can be as crazed or happy as they want to be because it doesn't affect where I'm at. And so I'm using it as an example somatically. I don't know if it goes into where you're headed to, but that's really the way I show up to these experiences and people are. like in a desperate way to change someone's opinion or to have someone perform something and make them feel better.
So do you see, Luis, kind of that sturdiness and stillness as part of that alchemizing process that you were talking about in response to when someone is coming at you with that vitriol?
You got it. You got it. And that's what I've taught to the people on my platform who follow me, especially back in October and November when all this started in the Middle East. And I mean, it's been going on, but when it got really popular, is people would say to me, how dare you be a trauma therapist or an educator or a somatic educator and not be talking about this every day on your platform? And it's exactly what you said. Again, if I'm in a room with a client one on one, and they come in and they are completely broken down. They are crying, they are hysterical, they haven't slept for 3 days, they have tons of anxiety. I'm not going to join them in their anxiety. I'm not going to tell them to even talk about their anxiety over and over again. I'm going to counter it and not in an opposing way, in an alchemical way where I'm going to get slower. My voice is going to calm down. I'm going to breathe. And we're actually going to attune to the opposite so they can find their ground. And that's how I navigate in that period, especially being on social media when a lot of people were coming to say, you need to pick a side and be vocal about it. And I had both sides telling me this. And I wouldn't do it because I'm not um, a political war strategy page. I'm a page that teaches people how to feel into their body, regardless of what's happening in the world. So people come to that page for a sense of like silence and safety in themselves if they can find it, and practices, not more repeating of the activating source material, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's how I see it. I see it as how can I alchemize this rather than build it? And if it takes me out of my center, that's my signal that it's not good for me.
Mhm. And to someone who says, like, well, that's great, that you're able to stay calm and steady, or that other people, like Luis, can maintain their calmness and not pick sides, but you really need to, pick a side so that you can act in the world and help achieve justice on whichever side that you pick, whatever side you think is right.
Mhm.
What would you say to that?
I would say I'm not egoic enough to think I have that power. Truly. It's that simple for me. How I treat you in front of me right now, this is my this is my responsibility. And there's a certain level of being comfortable, and it's very controversial, but to be comfortable with suffering. That suffering, there is so much suffering and injustice in this world right now, so much, 20 miles away and 20 hours away. And to attune to all of it and to think I need to have my hand in all of it, to me, it underplays like the great mystery of God's spirit, whatever we want to call it,
Hmm.
that is part of these things in a way I can't be. So for me, it's like the body tells me that because when I start going into other people's suffering to try to like save them from it, I deteriorate.
Hmm.
And I have yet to meet an activist that sleeps really well at night. Yet to meet one. Not opposed to activism. I've been an activist. I respect it. I've respected the privileges I've experienced from people being activists for causes that have helped me. And the body does not do very well with it if there isn't enough spaces and joy and breaks in between.
Oh man, yeah. Um, you're saying like I'm only responsible for what's in front of me, or I only can be responsible for
I
what's
only
in front of me.
can
That's
be exactly.
literally what the only thing that I can control is what I can, manipulate that's right in front of me, what I can exert action on. And maybe that could be within the context of some larger social or political issue. Maybe I, have a conversation with a friend, or I write a blog post or something like that. That is something that I can do,
That's
but
it.
that's different than I am changing the world all by myself.
That's right. And I loved how you said to act, because this is where agency comes in.
Hmm.
No one has the right to tell someone else how to use their agency. If you really distill that, it's like telling someone what to do with their body, which is like a huge no-no. We know
Hmm.
that. Yet when you're telling someone to hashtag something, you're telling them what to do with their body. You're telling them
Hmm.
how to use their fingers and their time and their brain and their energy. Whereas, how does your body want to show up to this thing?
Yeah.
If one person's way is to be really kind to the cashier at the bank today, and the other person's way is to write a blog post to a million people to follow them, both people are doing their work as far as I'm concerned. You can't quantify someone's goodness. So I
Hmm.
think it's beautiful how you said that. It's like, how are you able to act? That's a different answer for everybody. So there isn't one way to act when there's injustice. There's just not.
And wanting other people to act a certain way and wanting to have agency over other people's behaviors, would it be fair or maybe a good question to ask whether this is a reenactment of trauma? So in the name
Hmm.
of trying to create a better world and have justice, and create more compassion in people, are we actually perpetuating the same kind of behaviors and loss of agency that maybe we've experienced in our own lives too?
That's exactly how I see it. Because I know from being in experiences growing up where my body was oppressed or my safety wasn't possible at certain points. I know what it's like to then finally have a platform. And when I mean a platform, I don't mean Instagram. I mean a moment where you suddenly have agency that could possibly be over others. And there's that piece in you that wants to make sure you are never dominated again. And that's what we call the oppressor. So I practice oppressor empathy all the time, which is not popular to practice. But I'm constantly, because it's very easy to empathize with the oppressed. Like I don't have to practice that. The difficult practice is someone that's actually abusive. How can I empathize with them? Not to allow or to agree or even to condone the abuse, but to understand what's really under it. And it's a fear of being dominated. And it's exactly what you said. It's somewhere you were. And then the moment you got a chance to be on top, you stayed on top. You don't know how to have power with, you only trust power over. That's another strategy. So it's absolutely a trauma reenactment as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And I think, Louise, like that is the sort of alchemical um, response or mixture. In my view, that can actually help to bring down some of the tension and to help us to heal is how you were describing relating to how do we relate to the oppressor or just the person, the enemy or the person that we
Yeah.
hate? Are we relating to them with, again, a sense of antagonism or wanting to then be on top of them and oppress them? And that's a continuous game. Or can we somehow have enough compassion, as you say, to understand where their experience is coming from? And what I say is like, just can you be the bigger person? And lead through. It's not, I don't think it's letting anyone off the hook or condoning or anything like that. I actually think that it's being the bigger person and whatever to show up to someone with love because it helps to transform the whole process.
It is, and when you say letting them off the hook, it's like somatically speaking, if your body is the hook, you are letting them off the hook. You want to let them off the hook. You don't want them in your body endlessly ravaging your system and
Right.
adrenalizing you till your dying day. That sounds horrific. So it's like, what's the real oppression here? And I think what fascinates me with that is just the way you said being on top. We all have capacity to be oppressed and to be oppressive, all of us. And it humbles me so much to know that there's the right thing could happen to change how my brain works, that I might want to dominate somebody. So when I see someone dominating someone, if I come to them in any dominating stance, I am invoking the exact thing that I am apparently opposing, again, and trying to extinguish or transform. So just like you said, I rather show up to an oppressive dynamic, not with more oppression, but something opposite. And that doesn't mean go seek out an abusive person to change them. It means when you are seeing it in the world, what's happening in your body. I've seen people watch the news and get really overwhelmed and go into a grocery store and scream at someone that cuts in front of them, right? It's like they're taking in so much stress that then they create this harmful experience of shouting in someone's face because they're so enraged from what they just watched on the news. So this is why the somatics is so important to me.
Do, do you think that I know this is like a maybe like a bit of a, I don't know, not a cliche, but seems obvious, but do you think that like with everything happening in the world, like all the trauma and chaos that's happening in the world, like do you think that we really take that on and that as a whole we're becoming kind of more dysregulated and therefore because I've been seeing a lot of people like I just feel like like drivers have like been like running more red lights lately,
Mhm,
like acting
mhm,
crazier. I've noticed that like my road rage has been worse. Like
mhm.
people are acting sort of unhinged, and I wonder if you see like a connection between that and like the dysregulation of the world and like having seeing those
Mhm.
things as connected to each other.
I totally agree with you. There's so many layers to this because there's the idea of if someone's suffering, we all feel it. I don't agree with that depending on the situation because I've done my own experiments with my own body and with groups of people where we don't watch the news, we don't go on social media, and we're just fine. And someone in the next home right next to us or the apartment right across from the hall is freaking out because of what they're taking in. So
Mm,
there's the reality of yes, in my household if someone is ill and I'm caring for them, or if someone in my direct life is depressed or devastated or hurt, I'm gonna have some empathy because I'm coming in touch with them. Like when I used to live in the city, and I would pass these homeless men on the street that were passed out. My heart would just pull toward them. I wanted to like hold them. So yeah, I was thank God as I was empathizing with people. Good, I want that. But this idea that it's just this kind of kinetic force in a city where you live I think it's very possible if a bunch of people are taking in information that activates them and they're interacting on the streets, that activation builds. Because where's the counter vortex? Like, what's the thing that's publicly countering the stress? I don't know where it is in LA. Maybe the beautiful trees or the mountains, if you can see them through the
barely exist.
smog. Barely exist. But it's like when I watch the news, the times that I do, often as an experiment to feel there's never a pause to give you the opposite. There's no pendulation between pain and pleasure. There's
Mm,
just a focus on the pain. So, yes, I do see that as becoming dysregulation, and that can become group and even cultural dysregulation if everyone's taking in the same information for sure.
Nice, nice. Um, Anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to share with our audience listening?
Yeah, I think I want to put just a little piece in about nutrition because
Please,
it's part of the roots of my work that most people don't talk about when they talk about trauma. It's the last thing we think about.
that'd be
But
awesome.
yeah, if trauma is a biology and we're talking about capacity for connection and capacity for discomfort and conflict, capacity is a biological experience. I- One way, for example, is your liver's ability to detoxify excess adrenaline from your blood. When there's less adrenaline in your bloodstream, you start, quote, calming down. So it's an actual function of your organs and cells to detoxify and metabolize stress and stress hormones on a physical level. So, what helps increase your body's ability to have less adrenaline? What you eat. Certain foods will stimulate your adrenal response. Other foods will depress and wipe out your adrenal response. And then some totally balance your adrenals. So
Mm,
they nourish your adrenals, they nourish your nervous system, they balance your blood sugar. So your body's able internally to have less stress from the diet. So then when it meets stress externally in the world, there's already this inner capacity to meet it. And it doesn't get enough of the spotlight because we think so much about strategy and mindfulness, which is excellent. But nutrition is something we have to come in contact with every day. So what you choose to eat for breakfast can literally change how stressed out you get from listening to the news or disagreeing with your lover. And I find that fascinating. So
mm.
it's a big part of the work I do as well.
Just out of curiosity, what foods upregulate the adrenals, downregulate, or just totally kind of or help to balance them?
Yeah. So the stimulants, the one category are stimulants. So anything with caffeine, which is the obvious for most people. The not so obvious for others is sugar, high
Mhm,
sugary foods. The moment your blood sugar spikes, you have to have an insulin spike. And when you have an insulin spike, you have a blood sugar drop. And then when the blood sugar drops, you have an adrenal spike. That's just the way the hormones have to work to make you have
mhm,
balanced blood sugar levels. So when you skip meals and you have an excessive amount of sugar, believe it or not, excessive amount of sugar is 8 grams or more. It's tiny
mm,
teaspoon of sugar. Or when you're having caffeine, especially caffeine on an empty stomach, you're adrenalizing your system. That's instant stimulation. You recreate or create the biochemistry of stress and trauma just from what you ate for breakfast or didn't eat.
mhm,
Then we have the depressants. That's the other category. these are the foods that are so difficult to digest. These are our processed foods, baked goods, pizzas, pastas, wine, cannabis, everything that tends to kind of like lower our system,
Mm,
and specifically the foods, so getting off the alcohol or the drugs, but the foods that are difficult to digest, they require so much blood flow being redistributed from all the other parts of the body where you'd feel anxiety down to the stomach to digest these really high caloric fatty foods.
mm,
So during that redistribution period, which is usually 3 or 4 hours while you're digesting them, your body gets to have this sense of I'm calm because all this blood pressure, all this excitement that's been in your face and your chest and your arms is going to your belly to digest. And then you get exhausted from the energy output to digest it that you think you're calming down, but really you're just getting fatigued.
mm,
And then once they digest and you metabolize, you go right back to your anxiety. And this is why we have compulsive eating with comfort
mm,
foods.
mm,
And then we have the balancers. These are the really simple whole foods. These are beans, vegetables, fruits, nuts, meats if you eat meat. Simple, simple foods. And these whole foods, they balance your blood sugar. So when your blood sugar is balanced, you're not going through this insulin, adrenaline stress response. They nourish your adrenals with all the proper nutrients your body needs, for your endocrine system, and they nourish your nervous system. So they aren't exciting foods. They're usually quite bland and humble, simple foods, but they keep your body on this beautiful equilibrium. And then again, when you actually counter stress externally, you have this equilibrium countering the stress. Rather than I woke up and had coffee instead of breakfast, ate lunch at 2 p.m., had a chocolate bar because I was dragging through work, and had to have a giant bowl of pasta at night to fall asleep with ice cream because I was so adrenalized from the day.
mhm,
That is so stressful in a 16-hour period just from what I ate. So then that stressful body has to counter stress in the world, and it's not very successful. So that's like
mhm.
that's a tiny, put it in what's the term we use? Like
Like a
nutshell.
nutshell. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm putting it, I wanted to say I put it in an acorn for you. But
yeah.
yeah, that's like the
That works too.
nutshell answer.
Nice. Yeah. Do you advocate or in the people that you work with, like, do you typically suggest like a certain type of diet or more so just leaning towards like kind of whole foods or just taking it, taking an individualized approach with each person?
I have a diet I created called the Quiet Diet, and it essentially is a specific guideline of which foods and how to put them together for people.
Mhm.
In general, whole foods are just the way to go. Whole foods and local fruits, and there's so much more to get into right now, but I just can. But those are really what I advocate for. I don't say be vegan, be omnivore, be pescatarian. It's really dependent on the body. Because some bodies can have one certain diet, like they can be Ayurvedic or macrobiotic or vegetarian, have an incredible result, and other bodies really need animal protein or need less carbohydrates, or it's so dependent on the individual. But
Mhm.
the practice that I teach, the somatic practice of nutrition and of eating, it gets you in touch with your own instincts. You can actually feel, is this a craving from an emotion or is this a craving for nutrition? And then you kind of let your body be your compass, which changes as you age. So it's not going to be the same anyway for anybody. It's going to consistently evolve.
Mhm.
Um, I'm actually doing an entire 6 month nutrition course in July because
Amazing.
it's so layered that I decided I'm just gonna do 6 months of this with a big group of people and teach everybody who wants to learn.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I will make sure to get that link from you for the 6 month nutrition course, so I can make that available. Your podcast is called Holistic Life Navigation. It's fantastic, and I just started listening recently. I can't wait to listen to more episodes. Like, there's
Oh,
a
I love that.
lot of juicy stuff in there. I'm genuinely very, very excited to listen to more of it. And I
I'm having the
believe,
same thought as I sit with you. I'm
oh,
thinking these are
good.
such good questions. Like this guy's amazing. I want to hear everything you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Luis. So I will definitely link to that in the show notes as well. And then I think you also have a course coming up. Is that right? Like a 7 week course, not the
That's
nutrition,
already
but
happening. That
that's
one,
already
the
happening. Okay.
next one is September.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Cool. So I'll include a link to your website so people can check out your website and kind of keep a
Mhm.
pulse on that if they're interested also in kind of doing some more somatic work with you. Um, Best way to follow you is through your website, anywhere else where people can learn more about your work.
I would say go to the website and sign up for the newsletter because everything I do goes to the newsletter before, often instead of social media. If you want to get a sense of, little kind of teaching, social Instagram or YouTube is a great place to go and the podcast. But you can find all that through the website, which is holisticlifenavigation.com.
So fantastic. Great. Lewis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was such a pleasure talking with you. I can't wait to go back and listen to this episode so I can digest a lot of what you said again. And I think our audience will really, really appreciate it as well. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This is an excellent interview.